I've had people come in here and want to argue with me, and they call me a racist. Why am I a racist? Because I deal in flags?
Rex Miller uses his Confederate store to preserve what he says is a lost part of history.
Morgan Troxler has been surrounded by family her whole life. Now this millennial is following through on her biggest decision yet, leaving home.
Why are you afraid?
Just because I don't want to, end up, I guess you could say less fortunate than I am now.
I'm Jackie Pascale. I'm Emily Harrison. Those stories on 30 Minutes. The last battle of the Civil War ended more than 150 years ago, but the battles over civil rights and Southern pride continue. While most textbooks show an accepted version of the Civil War, at least one man says we've only learned the view of the winner. Rex Miller is dedicated to telling a story he says is lost in history.
I consider a Yankee is that person who knows what's best for you. They're doing it all the time nowadays.
So are there Yankees in the South?
I imagine there might have been.
Now?
Oh, they're everywhere now. They're like cancer.
An hour north of Charlottesville, Virginia, the rolling mountains give way to deep valleys and long stretches of farmland. In the middle of it all, Rex Miller owns the Crossroads Country Store, an homage to the Old South and the Confederacy.
So I said to myself, I want a store that's not like any other store. And so I thought, what would be a theme that would be difficult for some people to copy? And I thought, well, the Confederacy.
For Miller, his store is his classroom. Every customer a wide-eyed student and another chance to advance his version of the American South. Miller says students are being taught incorrectly about the causes and results of the Civil War. He says the American education system teaches only one side of history.
So all of this, the Southern history that you're talking about, so that's all in these books.
Yeah, and see, you don't get that in the Yankee version of history. You don't get any of this stuff. If you want to pursue what's best for you and your family and your community, and if you want to be left alone, chances are you're a rebel.
I'm a rebel. I'm a Southerner and afraid of it.
Maryland native and store customer Joyce Urey has been coming to Crossroads Country Store for years. She says while some people might find the merchandise and the topic itself controversial, it's all a matter of opinion.
Have you kind of heard about any of the controversy over some of the stuff in the store, or have most of your friends?
I don't care what controversy, as old as I am. Forget it. Forget it. It's me. And I have my opinion, but other people can have their opinion too. Don't push on me what you think, and I won't push on you what I think.
We're bound by the documentary record. We can't make stuff up, but it is always and forever an interpretive act.
Dr. Charles Irons is a history professor at Elon University. His master's and PhD are in American history. Irons says people can have their own opinions, but some historical events cannot be contested.
There's no fixed and set, definite meaning for something that happened in the past. We in the present, we explain it, we label it, we choose how to teach it. So I'm pleased that people recognize history itself as an interpretive act.
I'm not interpreting anything. I'm just reading what the man said, and it makes sense to me today. There's no interpretation involved.
But we're still talking about it today.
Mm-hmm.
And your store kind of revolves around bringing up history and I mean, you're selling a lot of it.
We're exposing the public to real history.
University of Virginia assistant professor Justine Hill Edwards has never stepped foot in Miller's Confederate store, but she is no stranger to the history sold there. She has a master's and PhD from Princeton University, where she studied slavery and other aspects of African American history.
I spent some time this morning reading South Carolina's Declaration of Secession, and they were unequivocal about their reasons for wanting to leave the Union, and that was because they felt that Northerners were impinging on their rights, their God-given and constitutionally protected rights to own human property, to own slaves.
Yeah, they reference slave-owning states multiple times.
Multiple times,
Yeah.
exactly. We can't separate the two, slavery from the American Civil War.
I've read the diaries of soldiers. I've read the letters they wrote home to their wives. They weren't fighting for slavery.
So you don't believe the war was caused by slavery?
No.
What do you believe it was caused by?
Northern greed.
Miller also says slavery would have died out without a war, but Hill Edwards says historical evidence shows slavery was vital to the economy.
There are people who say that that the American cotton industry was on the decline. But I mean, if we look at the numbers, that was not the case. Slavery and its relationship to the American cotton industry was not on the decline. In fact, northern industrialists were highly dependent on slave labor and slave production of cotton. So these economies were intrinsically reliant on one another.
Miller even has differing opinions on the quality of life for slaves. He says he doesn't think slavery was that bad, going so far as to suggest slaves were treated like part of the family.
And they had free time, and they were free to earn money in their free time.
Yes, slaves had free time, but they had to spend their free time doing things to support their own survival. Insofar as planters and mistresses believing that that slaves were part of their family, sure, they may have believed that, but that's one perspective. The other perspective is asking, did enslaved people actually believe that they were by and large part of the family? And the answer to that is a resounding no.
Hill Edwards says cultivating gardens, raising livestock, and trading goods are a few examples of how slaves made money they needed to live.
We're talking about pennies, right, or dollars. They bought goods that they needed, right? And
They bought things to survive.
Exactly. They bought blankets, they bought shoes, they bought hats.
And so they weren't being supplied with any of this from their owners?
They may have been, but the quality of the garments, the frequency with which they got them, perhaps once or twice a year, meant that oftentimes they may have been clothed in rags.
Slavery was officially abolished in 1865 with the 13th Amendment, and Jim Crow laws restricting rights based on race ended more than 40 years ago. But racial bigotry is still a topic of conversation today.
It was not long ago, I can recall the last time I've been called the N-word. It was this time last year I was in traffic and some guy speeds by me and calls me the N-word. and it was jarring, but I kind of laughed because it told me, okay, all of these things that I think I'm feeling or seeing actually exist.
Do you think white supremacy exists today?
See, that's a construct, white supremacy. Earlier I said, love of kin is not hate. Self-preservation is not prejudice. And that goes against what everybody is saying about anybody with white skin.
Miller and Hill Edwards also have differing opinions on the meaning of the Confederate flag today. For Hill Edwards, it's a symbol of hate, but for Miller, it's about Southern pride.
Why the emphasis on the flags? I'm curious. There's a lot of
Part of history. And of course, hiding the nasty ironwork, and I just thought it was a colorful way to decorate. Mm-hmm. The Confederate flag was not an issue 20 years ago. It's only become an issue recently, about 2-3 years ago.
You don't think it was ever an issue before then?
Maybe with ignorant folk, but not in particular.
Well, I think the controversy of it wasn't necessarily with whose flag it was what they were standing for.
Right. And that's a sad thing.
What does the Confederate flag mean to you?
It signifies to me an attempt to preserve institutionally a history of white supremacy and a history of separation.
People who wave those flags, who sell those flags, it obviously means either something different to them or they don't really think about those who it's affecting.
Or they are fully in support of that and are not ashamed to show it.
I've had people come in here and want to argue with me and they call me a racist. Why am I a racist? Because I deal in flags?
So you said in your world, racism is not a thing.
I have black friends. I have black customers. I mean, they don't bother me. I mean, they're human beings. You judge a person on their personal conduct and content.
Mm-hmm.
That you either have character or you don't. And if you lack character, you're not going to be allowed in my circle of acquaintances and friends.
Just because one has black and brown friends does not mean that one cannot act in a discriminatory way, right? Just because one supposedly has black friends does not kind of let one off the hook for racist and discriminatory behavior.
But for Miller, it isn't about racism or discrimination. It's about holding on to a piece of the Old South while the world changes around him.
It's all part of the destruction of all things Southern and all things Christian. I mean, the South is vanishing.
The true South.
The South as a whole, there are pockets of Southerners, like-minded individuals, who are holdouts, I guess you could say.
So would you identify yourself as one of them?
Yes, I'm a holdout.
You're a holdout.
I'm unreconstructed. And proud of it.
College. It's a time to make big decisions. Before the millennial generation labeled as indecisive and entitled, this can be a challenge. Like others her age, one 20-year-old is faced with a dilemma. Leave home and follow her dreams, realistic or not, or stay in a place she has called home her entire life. It's a test for this generation, one that has no right answer. It's dinner time at the Garrison's house. The counter is covered with a home-cooked meal, a chicken casserole, mashed potatoes, vegetables, and rolls. For dessert, Mildred Garrison's famous pound cake. Tonight, like many nights, her guests are her daughter-in-law Joan and her granddaughter Morgan. 3 generations of women with lots of similarities and differences.
Their little thumbs is going to be like my thumb. See how crooked my thumb is? Well, that's from working, but theirs is going to be from texting.
Also, if she's not like texting, she's got it plugged into her ear while she's doing her homework.
What is the longest amount of time you would say that you've been unplugged totally from technology? And was it difficult for you?
I can't remember, and that's probably a sad answer, but usually I have my phone. Maybe the longest time that I'm unplugged from it is maybe when I'm sleeping.
Her mother Joan and grandmother Mildred see Morgan as the stereotypical technology-obsessed millennial. At 20 years old, Morgan falls on the younger end of this generation. What are some words that you would use to describe millennials?
Selfish, lazy, inconsistent, and young.
Out of those 4 adjectives, not one of them was that positive, though.
We're told that we're millennials, whether we do act lazy or we're productive, and we make a way for ourselves. But at the same time, I wouldn't know what else to call myself because my age group has been called a millennial.
Because she is considered a millennial, that there would be a point where she might have to prove herself a little, more so. Maybe in the workforce, be that outstanding person. Not that that's a fair thing that she would have to do, but I even felt that way for myself because of my disability.
Baby boomer Joan was left paralyzed from the waist down after an accident at 19. Regardless, she raised a family and maintained a career, something she owes to hard work, a characteristic millennials aren't known for.
I don't think a lot of people think that we have the same work ethic that maybe, per se, my parents or older family members did when they were growing up.
So would you say that you have a very strong work ethic?
Yes. And I'm still working here.
So at 84 years old, you're still out there?
Yes, and I'm proud of it.
But for Morgan, it's different.
Even though I have stated that my parents do provide pretty much everything I have. They have taught me a good sense of a work ethic and that you don't just get everything handed out.
Today, Morgan is trying to prove herself, just like her mom did.
I would really like to pursue a career on Broadway or be in musical theater.
Right now, with school as her priority, singing is just something she likes to do at church.
Oh, when she was very little, like 2, 3 years old, she constantly singing up and down the hall, you know, singing, and she would dance at you know, the commercials and stuff on TV.
But you're afraid to go that route.
Yeah, yes.
Why are you afraid?
Just because I don't want to, you know, end up, I guess you could say less fortunate than I am now. Like here, everything's provided for me, my food, a place to live, a car. Otherwise, you know, I'd have to be depending on my own resources to provide the money for those things and activities.
There's less security
Yes,
if you go that route.
Very much so.
And that frightens you.
Mm-hmm. If she had the right push, the right people behind her, she could do it. She could be the next big thing.
But because of the insecurity, she's somewhere stuck in the middle. TV programs like The Donna Reed Show portrayed an idealized look at life of a 1950s woman, dominating the kitchen with family as the first priority.
Come in, dear. I'll be with you in a minute. Hang up your apron, Donna. Let's be on our way. Store's open at 9 o'clock. Well,
A life Mildred led when she stayed home to take care of her 4 children. Today, Morgan has the choice to be a version of the 1950s stereotype, or she could take a risk. Right now, for Morgan, going to college is the risk she's willing to take. What are some parts that frighten you about leaving the nest and finding your own path?
I guess just being far away from home, just your typical you miss home phase, or if something does happen. The 2 colleges that I am looking at currently are at least 3 to 4 hours away from here.
Morgan is part of the 1/3 of millennial women who still live at home. Just 40 years ago, the numbers were flipped, and more women were living on their own or married. This February, Morgan turns 21, the same age as Mildred when she got married and left home.
And I guess being young, I just wanted to get away from home. Not that I didn't love my parents, but you know.
You wanted to start your own place,
I just wanted to start my own family.
But for Morgan, college isn't about her Mrs. degree.
A Mrs. degree is someone who goes to college strictly for finding a husband.
Yeah, no.
Not for you.
No, I mean, that would be great if it all worked out in one time because, you know, then I could live the perfect American dream, go to college, get married, have a house, have children, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, if it works out, then great. If it doesn't, then that's okay too.
What would you say your American dream was?
I think the American dream for me was like having a home, a family, and not so much that it had to be, you know, the greatest or the latest and greatest or the biggest or fanciest, but that you just had a home and you had a good family and you had a good marriage and that you were content with what you had and that you lived within your means.
Before she achieved the dream of having her own family, Joan attended college close to home. By living on campus, she says she was able to find herself, away from her family. Joan now wants Morgan to have that same experience, figuring out life on her own and, of course, hitting the books.
I did not want to be that person that was the party girl or, you know, the person that didn't, you know, I wanted to do what I was there to do. You know, I wanted to get that degree.
I'm a little bit more open to on-campus activities and to finding friends and social life more than I am a total bookworm where my mom and dad and family are like, okay, you're going to college to study and only study.
With the right push from her family, Morgan's decision to leave for college is her biggest yet. The comforting thought of leaving the nest is knowing she can always return to laughter and a home-cooked meal.
So our family is just like, you know, you don't have to jump up and say, here, have this seat. They just come in Get them a chair and sit down.
And even if you're not blood related and you're here, you're most definitely going to be treated like family.